Hello everyone, welcome back to IR202. The format for the course is a little bit different this term, so I thought it'd be worth just giving you a quick talk through how things are going to work, what we're going to be doing over the course of the next 11 weeks. The first thing you'll notice is that there are now 2 lectures per week. To answer one of the frequently asked questions I've had by email over the vacation, yes, you should come to both lectures. They will all be different. It's not just the same lecture happening twice. 3 main things we're going to be doing with the lectures this term. The first thing we're going to be doing is consolidating what we've learned in the first part of the course and talking a little bit more about how we're going to use that to prepare for the exam in the summer. First 2 lectures in week 1, I'm going to talk firstly about how foreign policy changes, and then secondly give you a sort of summary overview of what we've learned up until this point. The idea is to try and get you thinking actively about both how the things we covered in the first part of the course relate to each other, but also how you might be able to use them to understand specific instances of foreign policy. The second type of lecture we're going to have is a series of in-depth lectures on the 4 states that will be explicitly examined in the second half of the IR202 exam paper. Those of you who've looked at past exam papers already, and you should all do that if you haven't done it yet, you will have seen that the exam comes in 2 sections, Section A and Section B. You have to answer at least 3 questions overall, and you have to answer at least 1 question from Section A and at least 1 question from Section B. In Section B, there will be 2 questions each on the United States, China, Russia, and the United Kingdom. We will consequently have 3 lectures and 2 classes on each of those states. First of all, we've got Professor Toby Dodge coming to talk to us about US foreign policy, starting in week 2 and going on into week 3. You'll also have 2 classes, firstly on US foreign policy, and secondly on US foreign policy decision-making processes, also in week 2 and week 3. Next up, we'll have Professor Bill Callahan talking to us about Chinese foreign policy. And again, 3 lectures from Bill in week 4 and week 5, and 2 classes on Chinese foreign policy in week 4 and Chinese foreign policy decision-making in week 5. Then we've got the reading week. I'm hoping to organise another reading week activity as I did with our historical walking tour. Thank you to those of you who came along to that, by the way. I haven't decided what it's going to be yet, but I will keep you updated on that and let you know. After the break, we've then got Professor Margot Light coming to talk to us about Russian and Soviet foreign policy in week 7 and week 8. Again, 3 lectures from Margot and 2 classes, 1 class on foreign policy, 1 class on foreign policy decision making. Finally, I will be back to talk about UK foreign policy in week 9 and week 10. Again, 3 lectures from me in week 9 and week 10, 2 classes on UK foreign policy and UK foreign policy decision making. Finally, in week 11, we'll wrap things up. There'll be 2 revision lectures from me. Broadly speaking, 1 lecture summarising the course and talking about the things you should try and revise, and talking about any issues that anyone has flagged up to me that they want me to talk about in the revision lecture, and also 1 talking more about technique, about exam technique, about how to put together an IR202 essay, about the kinds of things I'll be expecting you to do in the exam in the summer. The final type of lecture we're going to have is a series of 4, hopefully, I've got 3 organised, but hopefully 4 guest lectures looking at the foreign policies of states that are not otherwise covered on the course. So in week 3, Professor Dodge is going to talk to us about Iranian foreign policy, about the foreign policy of a so-called rogue state. Then in week 5, Chris Alden, who normally runs this course, is going to talk to us about African foreign policy, particularly the relationship between several African states and the Chinese government. So that ties in nicely with the lectures we will have already had from Bill Callahan on China. I haven't got a guest lecture confirmed for week 8 yet, but the week 10 guest lecture will be my office mate, Dr. Alexandra Maria Boscia, who's going to talk to us about foreign policy of the European Union. And that's quite interesting in terms of talking about whether the European Union is a state, but what kinds of actors can make foreign policy. I always say when I do this seminar with the master's students, if it's got a flag, if it's got embassies, it starts to look a lot like a state, but the EU definitely isn't a state. So what is it, and what can studying that tell us about foreign policy decision making? There won't be any required readings for those lectures, there won't be any discussion classes on those lectures, but it's just an opportunity to give you a slightly broader insight and to give you a little bit more empirical material that you might be able to use in answering questions in the first part of the exam. There's a little bit of a mindset shift this term. We've talked in quite abstract terms up until now about ways of understanding foreign policy, and that's going to shift as we look at specific states and go into a lot more detail. The thing to bear in mind always is that as foreign policy analysts, we're interested both in what is specific about the particular cases we study, like historians, we're interested in understanding the specifics, but we're also, like other social scientists, interested in drawing more general conclusions as well. So whenever we're looking at specific instances, we're always asking, what is this a case of? What is the general universe of cases that this one case comes from? So that's just a thing to bear in mind as we go through the term. Final thing to say, the different guest lecturers have provided some readings to go with each of the lectures. I will still continue to do my weekly video reading digests and try and pick out some of the things you should focus on, but as a general rule, you should try and focus in particular on 2 of the states, probably no more than 2. Read something for each state, read something, probably 1 or 2 items from each lecture, ideally, but pick probably 2 of the states that you're really going to focus on and really try and read as much as you can about those states. As I said, you can't answer more than 2 questions on the specific states in the exam, so there's no point revising more than 2 in any great detail, but it's useful to know something about each state because, again, we expect you to use empirical examples in answering questions in the first part of the exam as well. Okay, that's enough for me. If you have any questions about the course setup or the way you should approach this second part of IR202, usual rules apply. Send me an email, send me a tweet, put a message in the comment box below, and I will answer your questions in the first week's lectures, which for me is next week, and for you maybe 3 months ago.